Welcome back to Podcast Recovery, everyone. We're your hosts, David O.
And Eric V.
And Carly R.
All right. That went swimmingly. Great job, you guys. All right.
Thanks.
Today we are joined by our very special guest, Rachel. How are you doing today?
I'm great, you guys. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. So where are you from, Rachel?
Newport Beach, California.
Newport Beach, California. Fantastic.
Yeah.
How's the weather?
Yeah, I gotta say, land is 75 and sunny. It's not so bad.
Ooh, nice. So when were you first introduced to recovery?
Oh boy, I first walked into the rooms back in around 2007, and it was the old story of, it was everybody else's fault but my own, and I was trying to get sober as a white wine drinker at night, and so I didn't really stick around.
All right. And so how long have you been sober?
I now have been sober since, we'll try this again, since August 22nd of 2016. So a little over 3.5 years. And, that was finally as a direct result of conceding to my innermost self that I am an alcoholic.
All right. Well, without further ado, we're going to turn it over to you to share your story with us. So take it away.
Right on. Well, thanks again, you guys. As I said, I'm fired up to be here. At the time of this recording, we're in quarantine, so my opportunities to get out and speak on panels and speaker meetings is obviously limited. So it's a great opportunity to get out of self and share the message. So, anyway, I grew up out here in Newport, and I grew up in an alcoholic, abusive home. It was my father was a real shrewd businessman. My mom was an alcoholic. And the picture of a perfect family, but what you didn't see behind the scenes was just an alcoholic abusive home. So with that, I developed a lot of fear. It was always that impending doom throughout my entire childhood. When was the other shoe going to drop? My mom, my parents, had a really just a terrible marriage. My dad, constantly cheating on my mom, me not believing him, and back in those days, in that generation, we didn't talk about these things, and so hence why I'm a double winner, with AA and Al-Anon, which I'll get into. But anyway, I always waiting for the other shoe to drop. And so my mom struggled with a lot of mental illness, and it was things as a little girl. And again, back in that generation, those things weren't discussed. And so she attempted suicide for the first time as an alcoholic when I was 8 years old. So looking back, when I got sober and all these things that I carried throughout my childhood that were my causes and conditions was, the fear of abandonment, and into my young adult years, we did not talk about that. If I talked about stuff like that, I was labeled a victim. I just swept underneath the rug. And so anyway, my father left. My mom and I then moved to St. Louis at 15, a few more suicide attempts from my mom. And, like any geography change, in the disease of alcoholism or addiction, we bring ourselves with us. And that's what happened when we moved to St. Louis, where my sister lives. So from the age of, I moved to St. Louis at 15. I moved there, and I was known as the California girl who loved David Bowie. And St. Louis did not know what to do with me.
Love it. What's your favorite Bowie song?
Oh, my God. I have a cat named Ziggy Stardust, so I'm not a wacky cat person, but Bowie loved his cats, and he was a sober warrior. So, I could go, oh God, Young Americans to, I could get deep, but oh gosh, you just opened a whole other can of worms. My heart's smiling.
I did.
And it's funny because I bring my when I speak on panels and stuff, you guys, I bring it back to like my spiritual experiences of like listening to his music. And I'll tell you one thing about, the reason why I bring that up and try to relate to young ones in the room is that during my hardest times in my life, I cried myself to sleep listening to Bowie since I was a young little girl. And during the most joyful times in my life, I listened to his music more so than any artist. So, He was definitely part of my journey. Let's just put it that way. But anyway, so getting back to St. Louis, so I moved back there, and little did I, I struggled in school. I struggled in school since I was a young girl. And again, more things we just didn't talk about. It was like, Rachel, you're lazy. Like, we have a tutor for you. And what I really didn't realize is that I had a learning disability. So I had all these underlying discomforts and things that, I started skipping school, and I just, I created so much additional fear in my life that, I never felt comfortable in my own skin, although I had a lot of friends. I had lots of good cake parties. I was that girl, and I was a fun one to be around. But there was just this pain that was deep inside of me that wasn't being dealt with. So I had a successful career in radio sales and broadcasting. I worked in corporate radio, and I started that when I was 18 years old. So I was introduced to underage drinking, getting into the bars and nightclubs, working for the radio stations, and just, working in rock and roll radio. And it was great. So it was awesome. So ultimately, my career brought me back to California with a job offer. And I got married young, have two amazing, beautiful children that are 25 and 23 today. And, but here we go back to those situations of, not dealing with those that fear and all. What was really the makeup of Rachel? Who was Rachel? And I was living, I felt as though, like this unconscious life. And even though life was moving so fast for me, you guys, the career, the family, the house in Manhattan Beach, California, the dog, everything looked picture perfect, but there was pain inside. So when my marriage started to fail, and as I called it, my husband would go out at night, since the kids were little, and every Saturday night with the quote unquote T-ball dads. And all the dads, and I was always, that fear of missing out that I was left at home every Saturday night. And I started drinking at home more so by myself. I was only a white wine drinker at night, right? Wink, wink. So in order to save my marriage, the therapist said, why don't you go to Alcoholics Anonymous? I can give you this great book, and you just have to say, hi, I'm Rachel, I'm an alcoholic. So, in order to try to save my marriage and doing it for everybody but myself, I went to AA and I introduced myself as an alcoholic. And something magical started to happen. I heard things about humility. I heard about the prayer of St. Francis, truly for the, I've heard it read, but I started to absorb it. And about humility was quit thinking about everything that's going on about you, get to right size and start thinking about others, was what I was hearing in the rooms. So time went on, I went in and out, the marriage failed, and I realized that white wine was making me ornery. So, those Chardonnay moms in Manhattan Beach. So, like the big book says, I didn't put whiskey in my milk, although, I tried it in other forms.
Oh God, whiskey in your milk? Who the hell ever did that?
That is in the big book. Yeah, that's.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
It's like, take a trip, don't take a trip. Should I put whiskey in my milk? Maybe that won't get me drunk next time. It's all basically what that is. It's all the levels of denial of the disease. So when I thought, okay, I'll switch from white wine to vodka because nobody's going to smell me. People would tell me, did you switch vodkas, Rachel? You don't smell like, that brand you were drinking. And I just, But anyway.
That's jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire, babe.
Yep, exactly. I became, needless to say, I became a 24/7 drinker, and I developed a physical addiction to vodka and to alcohol. And vodka, I was just a straight vodka drinker. There was no mix. There was no glass. There were bottles. and there was a lot of pain. You know,
yeah.
A lot of pain. And, in the meantime, when I want to go back to 2007 when I walked into the rooms, I didn't have the yets. I didn't have the DUI. The marriage was still, kind of holding on. I didn't have I didn't lose the car yet. I didn't have the yets. When I came back in this time, I had a whole lot of yets that already happened, but I had a lot of buts. Yeah, but don't you know the pain I'm in? Yeah, but don't you know? And it was always circle back to what I had been through. Me, the disease of me. And that was really difficult. I became a victim. I became a victim of my own circumstance. And I describe it as my victimhood was so grandiose that the pity party table was stretched so long and wide, and there was nobody there but the four horsemen, fear, terror, bewilderment, and just, and me. So nobody was showing up. Everybody had the B word, the boundary around me. And there was nobody that was going to help me except for me. So I ended up with, with that physical addiction, I was dying of the disease. I was losing mobility. I was having auditory and visual hallucinations. I was having seizures. I would wake up with bites in my tongue that I couldn't figure out what was going on. But the seizures, were happening when I was detoxing at home, and which was constant.
Yeah.
And an alcoholic detox, we could die from an alcoholic detox, and I was dying. And I was about to be Jim Morrison with a heart attack also, dying in my bathroom. But so anyway, one day I get to my doctor's office, and I think I have a doctor's appointment, and I get there, and she said, Rachel, she goes, you're not supposed to be here. I haven't seen you since last July, and it's October 2015. And I looked at her, and I laid down on the table, and I just go, shit. I said, I'm hallucinating. So she got me in an Uber, and I got down to Hoag Hospital here in Newport, and they were waiting for me. They did the blood work. And I'll tell you, the emergency room doctor came in and told me, he said, Rachel, if you don't stop drinking, you're going to die in 7 to 10 years. And he was real kind, and, they saw me, it's just like I was dressed for the day. But I'll tell you what happened earlier that day when I was going to the doctor's office was I sat down in the shower, and I couldn't physically get up. I had to crawl out of the shower. Talk about denial of my disease. That's how bad I was actually losing mobility, and I was dying right there. So anyway, they wheeled me up to the 4th floor, but before they wheeled me up, as the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous says, frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. I need some real tough love in order for me to hear the message. So the emergency room nurse turned around and looked at me and held my arm, and she goes, I'll tell you what, Rachel. She goes, you keep this up, you're going to be dead in 2 to 3 years. Don't count on 7 to 10. You're dying of this disease as we speak, and we're here to save your life. And she was firm with me, and I was like, holy crap. So they get me upstairs. 6 to 10 or 4 to 6 heart monitors is usually the norm. They had 12 on me, 2 IV.
Good Lord.
I was under cardiologist care. Yeah, I was dying. But here's the thing. That night with the 2 IVs, I'm hallucinating that my ex-husband's underneath the bed of my hospital room. So I'm whispering to the nurse.
That's a terrible nightmare.
Oh my God. Because I don't want to get him in trouble, so I'm whispering to the nurse. And I asked her, I said, can I just go home and feed my cat Ziggy Stardust, and I'll be right back? Wink, wink. And she's like, you're going nowhere. And I was like, oh. So, I was, of all those times, here's how selfish this disease is. I was dying of this disease, and I left my front door unlocked. Did I check to see if the cat had food before I left? I was more concerned about him when I was locked up in the hospital with the 2 IVs and the 12 heart monitors. I was so delusional. So anyway, I go down to detox after 4.5 days of being hooked up in the hospital. My pancreas kept me in longer, and organs failing. And I'm still having to have nurses help me walk, and I'm walking in a walker and can't even carry my own food tray. So after detox, which was fabulous, by the way, Hoag Hospital in Newport Beach is just amazing, and they have a great program. But I left and went to treatment, and I was in treatment with a bunch of 20-year-old heroin addicts. And what do? Like any good alcoholic vodka mom, I was looking at all the differences and not the similarities. So about 3 days into being at this place, I'm sitting on the sofa after we've eaten dinner, and I have my big book in my lap, and we're watching a movie, and I go into, and this is like 14 days after being out of the hospital, I go into a grand mal seizure. So I wake up, and this is after being medically treated from the disease. So I wake up in the back of an ambulance, and I'm in treatment with no makeup, nothing. And I look up at these paramedics, and mind you, California paramedics and firemen, I look up and they go, "Rachel, do you know where you're at?" And I'm like, heaven, and I was at Hoag Hospital. So I get in there, and the emergency room doctor's questioning me because my arms are just so bruised up from all the blood work and just being released from the hospital. He thought I was a drug addict. And I said, no, I'm in treatment right now. I'm an alcoholic. Look at my records. So 2 days after that, I walked out of that treatment center, and, I had that self-will, and I went into sober living. And went home after 30 days from that. And then I got the phone call from, my ex-husband saying, okay, everyone's done with you. You've really screwed this up, blah, blah, blah. And that's all I needed to hear. And I went back over to what I call my dealer, which was the liquor store, which is on every corner. And, my vodka, I was off to the races with my vodka again. And that continued on until the following August, when I finally surrendered. Yeah, it was brutal. And, I had that death sentence that was tapping my shoulder. And so while I walked back into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I stayed dry for about 8 months. And I'll tell you one thing, that when I was drinking, I did not want to die. I wanted to avoid that death sentence, but I physically could not put down the bottle. I was physically addicted, the obsession. I could not explain anything from what I learned that I had what was called a strange mental blank spot. I could not explain how I ended up, after detoxing in my apartment for 2 days, how I would end up back at the liquor store. And, and I was by myself, just, isolating. And, so I walked back into Alcoholics Anonymous, and I stayed dry for about 8 months. And the point I was going to make was, that the time I was dry, I wanted to die. In the story, in Bill Wilson's story, he talks about, and I talked about my yets. He talks about how the stock market's crashed. Oh, I'm not going to kill myself. People are jumping from the windows. I think I'll just go drink. Oh, it happens again. God, they're killing themselves some more. I think I'll go drink. And then at the end of his disease and his drinking, he's physically carrying a mattress down to the bottom floor in case he jumps. And that's how progressive, how sick we get, and how it's like, I'm not going to kill myself, and especially being a child of suicide. And my mom did succeed in killing herself when I was 22. And that was never going to be me. It was never going to be me. And I'll tell you, when I was dry and not working a program, I planned on killing myself. My son was going to graduate from USC. I wanted to get through that. He was a volleyball player, and I was in so much pain that I just didn't talk about it. I was in the rooms, but I didn't talk about it. I shared about what a victim I was. And then I started hearing things like, well, if you don't get a sponsor and you don't work the steps, it's like you're loitering. And I was like, oh, that's harsh, I was, my old home group is just, it's gnarly. It's so good, and it was just these people that just had hardcore, NA meets AA, that, guys that were out of prison, that lives were freaking fabulous, and had been running and gunning the streets of LA and Orange County for years. And today, what I heard was that their lives were fabulous and that their mothers and their families loved them. And I was like, damn, what is that like? And something magical started to happen to me. And that's where I started to surrender. And that's mostly what I wanted to talk about. And one of my favorite topics is surrender and how I did it. And I don't suggest walking into the rooms and not getting a sponsor and not working the steps, because that route of being a dry alcoholic is probably the most painful experience that I never want to go through again. So I finally got a sponsor, and I worked my steps quickly and thoroughly. And I worked the steps, and I take my sponsees through a way that Dr. Bob took his sponsees through, quickly and thoroughly. There's none of this business that we're going to sit around and wait on a 4-step. It's like, if you don't finish your 4-step, I'll help you finish it, when we sit down. But anyway, there's Wally P., who is amazing, and he's the archivist of Dr. Bob. And he has a book called Back to Basics. And this isn't a plug for Wally, but I'm just sharing, how I do my steps and what absolutely worked for me. I needed to get through these steps, and I needed to get through them quickly because I was dying. I wasn't necessarily dying of the disease. I was dying of self. And, and so when my sponsor introduced me to the Wally P. Opportunity to start doing my steps, and then doing them in clusters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And when I did that, the first time around when I walked into the rooms, I did my steps, but, I never did do a perfect first step. And that's the only step I have to do perfectly, is conceding to my innermost self that I'm an alcoholic and surrendering. And as long as I do that perfect first step every single day, which I do, I will stay sober. But I need to do a little extra action and footwork, which I do. And, the quality of my surrender was absolutely proportional to the quality of my recovery today. I had such a deep and profound want, because of sitting in the rooms and not wanting to be, loitering, but wanting what everybody else had, wanting to learn what a working knowledge of the big book truly was, and what I was told was, just do what the big book says. Keep it simple, and that's old school Dr. Bob. And so going back to my point was, when I did the steps the first time, I didn't do a perfect first step, and I also failed to enlarge on my spiritual experience by helping others in my 12th step. And, and that has been the game changer. And I knew that. So my sponsor at the time, she groomed me through this Wally P. Back to Basics process, like Dr. Bob. What we do is the concept with that is that you get through the steps and then you turn around and help somebody else. So, God shot, I finished my steps. 3 days later, my first sponsee walks up to me. Bright eyes, broken, darling young girl. She's out of jail. She's hit bottom. And she asked me to sponsor her. And I felt like, I call her one of my 9-step promises. I had that fear of people, fear of people, economic, blah, blah, blah. And she was like the missing puzzle piece to my program that fit right into place. And from that moment on, she's coming up on 3 years of sobriety. We go around and speak on sponsorship speaker meetings and panels together. But it was a game changer for me. And working with others ultimately today has become my greatest gift. And if you had told me back when I was in Hoag Hospital whispering with those heart monitors, and wanting to go home, that this would be my life today, that I could make a difference in other people's lives and help women recover from alcoholism, and that they too would get their families back and have, a new meaning in their life, I would never have believed it. It's such a gift. So, with that said, I think that's pretty much all of my story.
All
Awesome.
right. Love it.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. We definitely have some questions for you. I don't want to put you on the spot, Carly, but I want to give you the option. Would you like to ask the first question, or would you like one of us?
I'll go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, it's not really a direct question, but earlier when you started telling your story, you talked about your AA and Al-Anon experience.
Oh,
I was
yeah.
just curious as to what what's that like?
Thank you. And that's better to segue into that today, because this is like, for this part. So thank you, Carly. So, as a result of realizing that, I too was an adult child of an alcoholic, I walked into the rooms of ACA, Adult Children of Alcoholics, and I realized, that was way too painful for me. I was already sober. I was having a spiritual experience. My relationship with God was I was floating on that pink cloud, which I still do today because of my spiritual connection, by the way. And that's my choice because I connect. But I walked into ACA and it was really painful. I didn't want to have to sit and rehash all the past. I got into a life today that I want to live in solution and get present. So a friend of mine, and I have and part of my story is, and the success of my sobriety is that I lean into spiritual, I call them my spiritual Jedis. And I get playful with my recovery. Yeah, I get playful with my recovery. I have nicknames for everybody because you know what? My recovery is not black and white. My recovery is playful. It's fun. I'm alive. So I have a few spiritual Jedis that are just amazing people. And one of them one day kind of nudges me and he goes, Rach, I think it's time for double winners, AA and Al-Anon. And I was like, okay, and that's what I do today. I don't give any, when somebody asks me for a commitment in AA or a suggestion of what I should be doing with my program, I don't give a yeah, but I give a you bet. So he said, let me know how the 7 a.m. meeting is tomorrow after you get out. And I was like, oh, snap. So I got myself up, got to the 7 a.m. meeting, and I participate in my double winners. And I'll tell you what's changed about me, for my experience with that, is it's made me not only a better sponsor, but it's helped me resolve issues that I understand today that my mom, too, was also an adult child of an alcoholic. So while I had things about my childhood that weren't addressed and the things that we didn't talk about, I knew that my grandfather was an alcoholic. He died with a bottle of Ambassador Scotch underneath his bed, and I heard those stories. So me being the alcoholic I am, I thought, well, my vodka's in my purse. I'm not going to be like them, right? So anyway, Al-Anon really has helped me to uncover, discover, and discard a lot of those past issues, and learn how to apply tools today that just help in relationships. In all affairs, all relationships. Yeah.
All right. I think that's the title of your episode. Did you catch that one, Eric? Uncover, discover, and discard.
I love it. It's the layers of my onion, and I talk about that. And the layers of my onion, thanks for that, David, is that they're emotional, spiritual, and psychological, and not necessarily in that order, And the layer of my onions just continue to be revealed, but that's just like continuous action and recovery. Getting complacent is not an option for this girl.
I gotcha. All right. Do you mind if I go next, Eric? Is that okay?
Go ahead, David.
I make sure to ask permission, I do my diligence, buddy.
It started off that way, it seems.
Absolutely. So my question is, like, you talked a lot about sort of that like that victim mentality, and that being a victim is 100% like a real thing. Absolutely. I myself was a victim of like child abuse, like negligence, a lot of shit. But at what point do we go from being a victim to being a volunteer? Because like in my story, I took that victim mentality and then I applied it to my addiction, which I very much volunteered for.
I couldn't agree more with you. And until I got down to my causes and conditions and quit blaming everybody else, as I talked about, like my surrender each day, my surrender is about people, places, things, caramel M&Ms. Caramel M&Ms make my teeth unmanageable, and vodka, but I started, I applied my program thinking immediately from the get-go to the people, places, and things, because I drank at people, and that created that victimhood. And so, and that made me a volunteer until I was no longer a volunteer, and alcohol was a necessity with the physical addiction. But I was a volunteer to my thinking. And that's where I came in with that whole bucket full of, but don't you know all the pain I'm in? So, and then I had one of my other spiritual Jedis, he looked at me one day and he goes, Rach, victims don't recover. And I'll tell you, at that moment, I sat up a little bit straighter. My shoulders perked up, my chin was up, and I walked a little taller. And I still do as a result, because I listened to what he said. And I said, I didn't want to be an emotional hostage to myself, because the rent I was allowing others to take in my head, they had no idea, and that victimhood. Yeah, I wore a big crown of it.
Nice. What you got, Eric?
So,
Eric's going to bring out the big guns.
Right on.
Oh man, David, you're in a mood tonight, aren't you? So
I love you, Eric.
I guess I kind of want to stick with the double winner thing.
Okay.
Because you're the second person I've ever heard use that term, and I'm familiar with the way AA works. I'm not as I understand conceptually how Al-Anon functions as a fellowship. I'm not quite sure how the program works, but I'm guessing it's fairly similar. Now, how do you use concepts from you said ACA, right? Adult Children of Alcoholics?
Right.
How do you use concepts from ACA and Al-Anon to improve your recovery in AA when working the program of Alcoholics Anonymous? How do you meld those two programs together to improve your overall recovery?
Good question.
That's a good question. That's a great question.
Good question. Okay, I'll try to answer this as best I can. Now, not to mislead you, I did not stay in ACA. I went in there and I realized that with these groups, I was going to find a better solution. What I needed to do was really focus on my recovery and keep helping others and wait for that uncover, discover, discard of those issues, because I needed just to work on really staying sober myself. So, and here's the thing, my parents were on my inventory list. And, then I went through the forgiveness, and while they're both deceased, I'm not able to make those living amends for my part and, things that I've done throughout my life, blah, blah, blah. And, but I'm able to in other ways as far as my living amends and how the kind of mother I am. But when I went to Al-Anon, I did question, do I have a seat here? And, and that's where the double winners, it's for sober women, working in Al-Anon program. So we do stick straight to the Al-Anon principles and we read Al-Anon literature. But what I heard in there is, as I mentioned earlier, was, women that had better relationships. And something I wanted to talk about was my daughter was diagnosed a few years back with a condition called schizoaffective disorder. And that consists of schizophrenia, bipolar mania, and, results in full-blown psychosis. And it's gnarly.
Wow.
Yeah, it's so my journey today is she's coming up on 2 years sober, and I'm a caregiver, but I'm also a mother. But here's what Al-Anon has helped me come to realize is that I have two roles with her. I have a role as a mother, and I also have a role as a caregiver. And I can separate those two. And nobody necessarily told me that, but I was able to get some clarity as to hearing the stories, working through the steps, working with others, and identifying that where AA would not necessarily have told me that. So, believe me, AA is my go-to for everything, my way of life, okay? But in Al-Anon, I was able to separate her disease, her condition, as if she was the alcoholic, and I'm on the other side of the fence. So I realized that, and then working on ideas and concepts like detachment and letting go, that alcoholism is a family disease, and that I identified the fact that my mom was also the adult child of an alcoholic. And I'll tell you, when I talked about the forgiveness, my forgiveness and understanding of my mother today is so much greater when I was able to have a new pair of glasses and just look at it from her point of view of what she went through. Because don't you know, I was the victim. I didn't realize she too was also the victim, and that alcoholism is a family disease for us. Does that answer your question with that?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So also just kind of, I just want to ask a follow-up with kind of like how mental illness, you're describing the mental illnesses in your family with your daughter, and as well, like, addiction in itself is mental illness.
Yes.
Now, and I you didn't talk about it here, but do you, and this is kind of a oversight question before the actual, question. Do you do therapy or anything outside of fellowship recovery? Like, do you see a therapist or do anything with like mental health?
What I do is I speak on panels, and my daughter participates in a partial hospital program. Mm-hmm. So I speak on panels there to the adolescent groups, and this is why I'm not able to do that right now during this COVID thing. And, and I talk about recovery to them, and I share a lot about my daughter's story and how vital it is with, schizophrenia, that, legal marijuana is not an option. But as far as your question with therapy, my daughter has a therapist, which is part of her triangle, if you will. Mm-hmm. And I get time with her. But, through Al-Anon and working the steps, I'm able to use that therapist in a way that I never knew how to use therapy. We would go and we talk, and we would want advice. But today I mainly go and I do the check-in, and I talk about the solution and everything that we're doing, and it's just, I'm able to utilize it, almost like my fifth step opportunities of sharing my inventory and then being able to let it go is how I use the therapist today.
Mm.
All right. Back to you, Carly. What you got?
Eric's done? Are we sure?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Coming out with the savagery. Love it.
Girl gang. Right on, Carly.
I just want to follow up to what you mentioned with Eric's question about being a caregiver. Now, how has being a caregiver for your daughter affected your recovery?
Oh, gosh. It's when she came to live with me, she was progressing, and I was just about, actually, I'll tell you, that's when I was just about to start working with a sponsor, and the miracle of it was I was having this feeling of I wanted to surrender, I wanted to change, I wanted to start to live, and then she came to live with me, and we both got into action. While she was progressing, the psychosis was happening. I started, that magical experience that I had with the first sponsee, I couldn't stop there. I continued to work with others. There was days where I would have to leave her for an hour or two at a time, which was questionable, but I never stopped working the program. I go to a meeting every single morning at 7 a.m., and I start my day with a meeting. And I'll tell you, I probably catapulted more through and I continue to. I mean, my program is super strong, which I'm really grateful for. But, learning how to overcome, and that was such a good question, Carly, to overcome a situation like that. What I had to do this time around was I had to put my recovery first. Unlike that first time when I was getting sober for everyone else, my kids, my ex-husband, I tell them, and my kids know today, I have to put my recovery first, so ultimately they come first. And that's what's happened. And, it's helped my daughter so immensely, in the balance that I'm able to maintain with it. Because, when I get off the phone and I'm doing FaceTime reading with the sponsee during this COVID time, or I take my daughter with me to read with sponsees in the park, outside of this thing, and she gets to get exposed to this. She and I are both sharing this magical journey together. So we both have grown, and our relationship and spiritual growth together is just unlike anything that I ever imagined. So I feel really fortunate. I feel really fortunate to have been inspired enough to do this thing and to continue my service work.
Yeah. Oh, it's absolutely amazing.
Thanks.
Yeah.
It's when all else fails, work with others, right?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I have two questions. One's a fun question, then one's a serious question. I'm gonna start with the fun one.
I like playing.
Oh, absolutely. So what do you find weird about us people from the East Coast? I gotta know.
You are funny. Okay, I am a true California girl, but I did live in St. Louis, and
halfway.
Yeah, it is, and I still have footprints in my heart on St. Louis with family there, and I did live in Connecticut / New York as a little girl, so I'm not foreign to that. I love the East Coast, you guys.
But we're weird. I gotta know what do you think's weird about us?
I don't.
You do this every time, David, to every single guest that doesn't live here.
I want to know.
But nothing's weird about it. Maybe are you internalizing something? Is this about you?
No,
Are you sure?
No.
I mean, you keep asking the question. You know.
Do you see this? Are you guys listening to this? Or we could all just gang up on the Midwest and just pick on St. Louis. We could do that.
No, dude, the Midwest is great. Like,
the country.
Great. Chicago, St. Louis, great cities.
We're all quirky. Here, I'll start. What I find, like I've said this before, what I find weird about California is the way you guys walk. You guys walk like you have no purpose. And it's like, I'm from the Baltimore-Washington corridor. When I'm walking, I got a fucking purpose. I'm trying to get somewhere. Get the fuck out of my way.
Yeah, we don't walk in LA. You know that.
Yeah.
We have a faster way of living over here.
You know what? And I think I adopted that, and that was part of that old Rachel is I always walk so fast. You know?
People in California don't. It's weird.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you there. Hey, it's California time, but not all of us are like that.
That's true. That's true. All right, now to the serious question.
Okie doke.
So, what was your most difficult character defect to overcome?
Oh gosh. Well, fear. By far, fear. Fear and shame. The shame, the ruminating, the shame of my past, the things I've done, then what did I say, old behaviors, and overcoming that, and the root of all that is basically my selfish and self-centeredness. And then hearing that was like, oh, snap, self-centeredness is the root of all my problems. And today, you know, when something comes back to me, as I said, the disease of me, whoop, there we go, selfish and self-centeredness, you know, and I inventory that stuff. So, you know, my fear, I talked about how that pity party was, table was so long and I was on the victimhood throne, but my 4 walls were FEAR. Yeah.
All right. All right. Solid answer. Who's next? Eric?
Yeah, it's that time, David.
It's about that time?
Yep, go ahead.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for the absolute best part of podcast recovery. Time to go to the Twitter, ladies and gentlemen.
So,
right on.
So, the way this works...
I love it, and Eric hates that.
Yeah,
Eric hates that so much.
I do hate it. I 100% hate it. But it's okay.
But you placate me, buddy.
I mean, your wife hates it too. So I think you're just doing it out of spite at this point, and that's fine.
Don't bring my wife into this.
She agrees with me. I know she does. We've discussed it.
I know she does.
Yeah,
she has her headphones on right now, and she can't hear.
She's probably listening to another episode, and that part just came on, and she just cringed a little bit. But you know, this is from Seabrook, or at Seabrook Rehab, and the question is, and the way this will work is, Rachel, you'll go first, then David, then Carly, and then myself. Is it possible to achieve overall health without taking mental health into consideration?
Oh, you know, that's a good question. I was diagnosed years ago with bipolar and ADHD. And while I took all the medication, I was still in my disease, you know, not the full-blown disease like I eventually ended up in. But I was struggling. I was on Adderall, Lamictal, Effexor, you know.
Lamictal.
Yeah, I mean, I was on a lot of medication, but I'll tell you, it didn't work when I was drinking. So back in those white wine drinking days. So, you know, I'll say that through the process, and, you know, I do suggest outside help. I do suggest medication. You know, you look at someone like my daughter, untreated mental health is just, it should not be that way. And without medication, my daughter could be in a world of hurt. You know, but our life would be a lot differently without medication. But in my situation, you know, what worked for me, my experience, strength, and hope was that I walked into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I got honest. I surrendered. I did an inventory. I had a spiritual experience. I found a God of my understanding, and I found a new way of life. And I started living one day at a time. You know, and when I used to do these presentations in my radio sales career, I got to a point where I felt like I was jumping. When I would talk, I felt like I was talking like I was 3 feet out in front of me. And that was my ADHD. And, you know, but when I took the medication for it, I was fine. I mean, I'm a true ADHD. Today, I'm not medicated. The only thing I take is melatonin at night. That is a miracle. And again, I don't endorse the fact of people not taking medication. I believe in it. As I said, this is, you know, I want to make sure of this. But in my case, what I was able to achieve by working a spiritual programming and having the spiritual life, you know, is just, and an AA way of life. AA is not my whole life. It's my way of life. And by doing that, you know, I live and I meditate daily. I use a meditation app, and I'm religious about my habits. I have good habits today. Where the phone and my habits, everything was so heavy, you know, with depression, picking up the phone, the sloth, the procrastination, all of that was so hard, you know. And today I have this way of life that I just learned to keep things simple and just do the best I can.
All right. So the question is, Eric, is complete health possible without addressing mental health?
Is it impossible to achieve overall health without taking mental health into consideration?
I'd have to say to some extent, yeah, I think it is a bit impossible because, I mean, that's a part of our body. That's, and like arguably it's the most important organ we have. I mean, it's our very existence is how we think, how we behave is all derived from that mental health. And that comes in so many facets. It comes in like in simple ways, like being nice to ourselves. Like, because for me, one of my biggest challenges, even today, like 7.5 years clean, is being nice to myself mentally. And it's a constant challenge for me in my recovery is like, what am I saying to myself in my brain? And there's a lot of times where I have to reach out to my network, reach out to my sponsor, and occasionally a therapist, because if I'm not keeping track of how my mind is behaving, because a lot of it's unconscious, like it's not all purposeful, but being able to infuse meditation into my recovery and into my life over the course of my recovery has really slowed a lot of that process down, and it's quieted a lot of those unconscious mean thoughts that I have about myself on a lot of occasions. So, like, I've had to do a lot of work and continue to do a lot of work on my own mental stability, because without that, at least for my story, like the mental health goes into like the self-harm avenue, and that's not a way to be clean either. And it's like, I have a clean time for self-harm. So like and that's an addiction in and of itself, because that feeling, that rush, that feeling of that illusion of control, and that all stems back to my mental health and my mental stability. So I think everybody needs to address it at the very least personally, and then secondly is socially talk to people about how you're thinking and how they're thinking. And then if you've gone those first two steps, sometimes you have to go to the third step and do it medically or professionally and get that outside help. But yeah, I think mind, body, and spirit. I mean, mm-hmm. I always put it in that order, because that's what it starts with. It starts with your own thinking.
Absolutely. And, I just want to say congratulations, by the way, on the self-harm time and clean time. That's so important mm-hmm. that you look at both sides, of that. And, the fact that recovery has taught us how to reach out and say, I can't do this mm-hmm. by myself, Yeah. And it turns the me and upside down into the we, yeah. And that was the greatest gift that I learned from recovery.
Love it. All right, Carly.
Can you repeat the question?
So, is it possible to achieve overall health without taking mental health into consideration?
Okay. I mean, in my opinion, and for me, I do not think that it's possible to achieve overall health without considering that mental portion first. I mean, David took it kind of right out of my mouth, the mind, body, and spirit. Like, my mind plays fucking tricks on me day in and day out. And if I cannot have some sort of stability there, then I can't function. Like, it takes me out of the game completely. So it's a shame, because in the field that I'm studying in, like, just realizing how much mental health falls to like the bottom of the totem pole, it's a shame, for especially with the kids that I work with, seeing it's brushed over, it's that it's not important, when really I firmly believe, like, I know, like, I have anxiety and depression, and when I in active addiction, I was on medication for it. But like Rachel said, when she was still drinking like that, it didn't work. It had no effect.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I'm on that regularly and have some sense of recovery and have been clean for over 2.5 years, I'm seeing that balance come back in. And it's not all the time, but like today was a day where because there was so much going on mentally, I could not get myself to, actually do something today, like to contribute to whether it was my own life or somebody else's. And it just completely took me out of the game. So I think if we don't have that mental stability and that mental health in mind, then it's kind of, it cripples you.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely agree. I've got both feet in both of this, so I'm loving this conversation. And that 1 in 5 people, I think it's a low number, struggle with mental illness.
Yeah.
It's just, today it's about breaking the stigma, and after this evening, I've got a 2.5-hour Zoom session with NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. So I really, I keep my feet planted in every program that I can, to talk about this.
Yep. Last but certainly not least, Sir Eric.
Sir Eric.
I mean, this is a simple answer. In order to achieve overall health, it's, overall health. I mean, if my left leg is overall healthy, but my right leg is broken, then is my health, overall healthy? Like, am I overall healthy? No. So I don't know. It's kind of a crazy question.
You're walking funny and then you're in denial.
You just got a hitch and you're giddy up, buddy.
So I think, I don't know. I mean, like you guys all talked about it, right? Where it's like you have to work on both the mental and, the mental and emotional. That's like a big part of recovery. And,
that's a big part of life.
So one thing that a lot of people do, especially when we talk about recovery, they don't take into consideration is your physical health. So we're working on our mental health. Like, we're retraining our brains in order to, combat our, habits and our addictive tendencies. But one thing a lot of people do falter with is physical health and, treating your body right. And, a lot of people will tell you that, well, I'm not drinking today, or I'm not putting a needle in my arm. And it's like, yeah, but you're eating McDonald's. And how many, Mountain Dews have you had? I don't think that's really, taking care of your overall health. Just because you're not, drinking or doing drugs doesn't mean the heart attack isn't going to come at 40 because of the way that you're treating your body. So if you're looking at overall health, just because you aren't drinking or using doesn't mean your health, you're doing okay. So I mean, that's my thing is if you really want to take care of yourself, take care of yourself. Don't just focus on just the mental aspect, because the physical aspect is really important. It's something I take pretty seriously, but I know a lot of people don't really. They feel like just because they're not doing one thing or the other, that everything's gotten better. But, if you have to take an insulin shot every time you eat, is everything better? I mean, was that not preventable if you would have stopped, eating a certain way? Or if you have if your arteries are blocked up, maybe eat less cholesterol? So I don't know. I'm looking at it from the other side. That's saying that, it's not just about how we recover from addiction, but if we want overall health, we have to do both sides to make sure that our body and mind are both healthy.
Well said.
All right.
Yeah.
Well said. All right. Well, looks like we're about out of time, but we would like to very graciously thank our guest, Rachel, for joining us this evening.
Woo! Thank you. It's awesome being here with you guys and having Carly on here for some girl power.
Absolutely. Loved it. All right.
Yeah.
Well,
So happy I got that first time over with.
oh yeah, you kicked ass. Here at Podcast Recovery, we are aiming to expand the scope of support for recovering addicts. Accessibility and convenience of helpful services is paramount to combating addiction. We work to bring the message of recovery to every addict, wherever and whenever it is needed. We believe that a powerful voice of recovery should be obtainable, practical, and at the touch of a button. Every addict deserves to hear a message of hope, and Podcast Recovery is here to provide it. All right, everybody, thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening. Make sure you go like, share, subscribe at our Twitter, our Facebook, our Instagram, our YouTube channel for more information about Eric, Carly, Allie, and myself. Go to podcastrecovery.com. But most importantly, everybody out there, stay safe and stay clean.